This is Crystal, aka Sauce.
And this is Tanya, aka Season. Welcome to Sauce and Season, a podcast dedicated to real people to provide real talk and real healing on various topics. We are both wives, moms, entrepreneurs, and business professionals. Our hope is that through these topics and experiences we share, we can gain new insight for ourselves and provide new insights for others. We are excited that you decided to join us as we take this wild roller coaster ride that we call life together and hope that you stick around.
Hey everyone, this is Crystal, aka Sauce.
And this is Tanya, aka Seasoned.
All right, so we are back with another podcast. We hope that y'all are doing well so far. So our podcast today is talking about grudges versus setting boundaries. The purpose of this particular topic is because me and Mom were actually talking, and I feel like when it comes to understanding forgiveness, a lot of people have confusion about what actually it entails.
Right.
So, for example, I've definitely had people who will tell me, just in personal life, that when I make statements as far as like I'm moving on or I'm not going to continue to entertain certain people, like, oh, well, you're holding a grudge. And then for a long time when I was a lot younger, I would think that was holding a grudge, right, because I didn't forgive people very easily, or I didn't let people back into my circle very easily. It's like, okay, well, maybe I am holding on to grudges. But as maturity, and with maturity, and of course with training, and even my job, my career as far as being a therapist, I really got an opportunity to learn the difference, right, between holding a grudge versus setting boundaries. And so many people get that confused that they end up forgiving and letting people back into their circle that does not need to be in that circle, right, and the same situation happens. So I want us to kind of talk about that a little bit, because me and Mom were actually just having a separate conversation. I was like, wow, this should be something that we talk about on the podcast, because I think so many people can also get insight into it.
That's true. For me, I was always conflicted about forgiveness, grudges, things like that, because of scripture. Because anytime you would say that you're moving on or moving away, most people would give you the scripture that talks about God said, or Jesus said, forgive 70 times 70, right? He said forgive. He never said go ahead and give them access to certain things again. That doesn't mean that you treat them in a certain way. It just means you know how far for them to go. It's like Judas, right? Did he not know what Judas was there to do? So it wasn't like, even at the meetings, I'm sure there was a way he didn't say everything in front of Judas, right? He didn't give Judas all the information. They also talk about old school, the older parents would say, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, right? So it's not necessarily meaning that because I don't let you back into a certain space that I have a hate or a grudge against you. No, I've forgiven you of what you've done in your past. But if your systems and the things you're doing continue to show me that you have not matured in that area, then why would I let you back in to do the same thing again? So if you hurt me once, stab me in my back, I'm going to let you back in and you stab me again? No, I'm going to forgive you. I'm not going to treat you any differently, but I'm watchful. The Bible talks us about being watchful. When Nehemiah was on the wall, he had his sword in one hand. He was fixing the wall, but he was always watching. God never told us not to watch, but people would always use that scripture when I say things like that. And it conflicted me, because then I would be like, well, maybe I'm supposed to let them back in. Maybe I haven't forgiven. Maybe. And then when you brought the topic up, it really brought something out, because I had just posted something similar on my page today. So yeah, we need to talk about that, because people don't need to feel in conflict for protecting themselves from the outside forces that try to come in and destroy what they're doing.
I agree. And that particular scripture is one of the things I always would hear very often. Forgive 70 times 70.
Right.
And I think we actually did a podcast a good while back. So if y'all haven't watched our season 1 podcast, go back and listen to some of those. And I think the podcast was actually talking about forgiveness versus forgetting.
Right.
And I mentioned for myself, I don't believe in forgetting. What do I mean by that? I'm a big believer in forgiveness, because forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is so that way you're not walking around carrying that hurt, carrying those grudges, carrying all that heaviness around you, while that other person may, let's just be very honest, sleeping good, eating good, and everything else, while you over here upset about something that happened 20, 15 years ago.
Correct.
So I do believe in forgiveness. However, I don't believe that you forget. No, you remember. You don't remember with the intention of being malicious, but you remember so that way you don't put yourself back in certain situations that can cause you harm again. For example, for my women who have been sexually assaulted, by somebody they either know or don't know. We talk about forgiveness during the stages of healing because, that's a huge part. They have to forgive what occurred, not necessarily forgiving the person, but forgiving even themselves for whatever
Right.
happened. There's a lot of self-blame that happens with those types of situations. And so we talk about forgiveness, but then do I go tell them, hey, forget everything that happened to you? No, you remember certain things. You remember, maybe that you came out later at night or whatever that situation is. And then we safety plan around that. So
Correct.
how can you be more mindful, or what do you want to look out for? What are some warning signs you want to notice? And so if they forget, then they could forget the situation itself of what put them in harm's way. And so, no, I don't believe that you forgive and you forget. You forgive and you remember, but without malicious heart and intention. So let's talk about what forgiveness actually entails, because I feel like people have it confused when we talk about grudges and
Right.
boundaries. So our topic is actually grudges versus boundaries, because there is a huge difference when
Very
we're talking
big.
about forgiveness. So
Correct.
forgiveness, the actual definition of it is the action or process of forgiving or being forgiven. And now I'm not a big believer in having the word in the definition, but I like the thought process of this part. But it says a deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance
That's
toward a
good.
person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness or not.
That's why it's for you.
Forgiveness does not mean
Yeah.
forgetting, nor does it mean condoning or excusing offenses.
Right.
That's the definition of forgiveness. Let's talk about grudges. A grudge is a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from a past insult or injury.
Right.
Right? And let's talk about now boundaries. Now, of course, the formal definition of a boundary is, marking the line in the sand,
Right. Drawing the line in the
drawing the
sand.
line in the
Don't
sand,
cross
and
that.
don't cross that particular line. But in the case of what we're trying to talk about, a boundary is setting limits on a situation or on
Correct.
a person. When we talk about forgiveness and whether you're doing certain things with holding a grudge versus a boundary, I make it very clear that I will forgive you, but I'm not going to be stupid to put myself back into a situation that can cause me harm in any way.
Right.
So a lot of people will confuse that and say, oh, you're holding a grudge. But let me tell you why that's not a grudge. The reason for me it is not a grudge because there is no ill will or intent. Like the definition says,
Resentment.
ill will or resentment from a past insult or injury. No, I don't have any ill will. I don't have any, resentment. I've forgiven you. And when I said I forgive you, I forgive you.
Right.
However, that does not mean I'm going to be stupid. And I'm going to say that and say the very definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again,
Right.
and expecting
Getting
a
the same.
different
Right.
result.
Right.
So if you spit on me, I am not going to put myself back in harm's way to get spit on again. That does not mean I don't forgive you. That means I'm using wisdom, right?
Yeah.
And so let's break that down. When I talk about I'm not going to put you back into my inner circle, I feel like a lot of people feel like me forgiving you means that it goes back the same way. And then we wonder why you're hurt. We wonder why you're bitter around these particular people, and all these things are happening because, yes, you quote unquote forgiven them, but you put back somebody in your circle that probably was not meant to be there. And you deciding to remove somebody from your circle does not mean you are not forgiving them or you're not holding a grudge if you really are letting it out of your heart.
Correct.
But you're using wisdom by saying,
That's
now
real
I
good.
have to set a boundary.
Right.
Now I know, okay, I can forgive you for, stealing my money out of my
Right.
pocketbook when you were at my house. Right? I can figure it.
But I ain't gonna put my
But that don't
pocketbook in
mean-
that same spot.
And it don't mean I
Unless
gotta
you
invite
close
you
enough
back
in
into
my
my
house.
house, right? So if I don't invite you back into my house, that means I'm not forgiving you. No,
That's
that means I'm
good.
using wisdom.
Right.
So I forgive you, but no, baby, we're gonna go outside.
Right.
Oh no, baby, we're gonna go out to eat. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You're not coming back in my house because you violated it. So now I have to set a boundary. And people will put themselves in harm's way because they continue to let somebody back in their circle because in
That's
their
so
mind,
good.
they're forgiving them and letting them back in. But that doesn't mean you can forgive and still set a boundary.
Right.
Why is it that we believe setting a boundary means that you're not forgiving nobody? No,
Right.
that means you're respecting yourself as a person and you're respecting the situation and you've seen how that situation has turned out. And now you realize a boundary must be drawn in that sand
Right.
to protect yourself and your household.
And I like how you said that part right there, your household. For me, my testimony of molestation or almost being molested, and I told about it, but that person didn't go away, right? And I had to protect my household. So with that being said, I educated you, and I told you this happened to me. So when you see me, I am very close to watching over you, brooding over you. And I remember one time you and I spoke when you were a lot older, and you said to me, Mom, how do you do that? Because here I am knowing what transpired and what happened, and you still go around this person with forgiveness. You're never mean. You never have ill will. What got me was that person was still around people I love. And so with that being said, I didn't want to punish the people I love because this person did what they did. What I did is I forgave. But I was smart. So when we were around, I was around. When you kids were around, I was around. That's just not going to happen. So protection there. So I didn't forget, but I did forgive. And I remember the person asking me the question, why did I say something? And here I am still around them. What am I going to do? You here. So that let me know your habits were still the same. You had not matured enough from something that happened when I was little. Now you're asking me questions about something. So like you said earlier, the forgiveness part was for me. Because obviously the me forgiving you has heaped coals on your head to let you know that your ill will towards me back then was something wrong. And so now I don't have to fight for myself because God has served his own vengeance.
Correct.
Because your thoughts will never let that out of your mind. Because here is someone you tried to hurt, and that person's forgiven, but they're not stupid. Forgive us for that strong word. But they're mindful of their surroundings. So I never let y'all out of my sight. I educated you because you were the oldest and you were the female. But I always told you, watch over your brothers. Because it doesn't mean it doesn't happen to boys too. So I had to make sure that you knew, because you would protect. And I knew your mouth. Your mouth was as big as mine. And you were very street smart. Right? I raised you to be street smart. And so with that being said, you're right. Because if we don't, we not only put ourselves in harm's way, but we put others in harm's way when we don't set boundaries. Like I used to tell you when you're little, don't sit in nobody's lap. I don't care if they related to you. Don't do it. I used to come snatch you up out of laps. Oh, you cannot spend the night over here. And there were some people, yes, I did let you spend the night, but by then you were able to talk, walk, fight, whatever you had to do. Communicate it. And you would let me know I'm not going back over there.
Yep.
If something was to happen. So, we have to protect our boundaries, our space. We can love people like God tells us, and we can forgive them. But we have to remember that there are boundaries in place. I always use my example of Judas, and that's what I carry in my heart, because for a long time, I was held to the opinions of people who would tell me, well, you got to forgive 70 times 70. And I've learned even in that, when people tell me stuff, we have to learn how to keep the baby and throw out the bathwater. So I'm learning that if I'm wrong, I get on my knees and say, God, you show me that. You teach me, God. I hear their opinion, and I don't just take their opinion and toss it away, but I say, okay, God, but I don't no longer let that put me in bondage. I no longer let that put me in bondage.
And I fully agree with the scripture. Continuously forgive. I think the issue that comes in hand is the misconception of what forgiveness actually entails.
Correct.
And it's the misconception of me forgiving you means that everything goes back to normal.
Correct.
And that's the part that I feel like there's so many people, clients that I see, but even people in our personal life that have that confusion that that's what that entails. And no, I can forgive you and know that you have to stay where you are. You know what I'm saying? I like use an example of having a relative or even somebody that you invite into your household. Let's say, for me, I'm married, right? You're married. If you know of a woman's intention, whether they're a family member or a friend, and you know that this particular family member or friend has done things with other people's husband, right? Does that mean I just invite you into the house with my husband?
To live with me?
I love my husband. I trust my husband, but I ain't stupid.
Right.
Right? But I'm going to now set a boundary. Whatever that may look like. For me, that boundary may be, baby, let me go and give you some money for a hotel room.
Correct.
Or what else I can do. So I think there's a lot of misconception about what forgiveness entails, and because of that, people allow things to happen to them.
Yeah.
And for like I said, when I was younger, I would fall into that trap because in my mind, oh my gosh, I'm holding on to a grudge. But when I started maturing and understanding, oh no, baby, I'm not holding a grudge.
Correct.
I'm not holding a grudge by saying I'm not going to allow you back into my inner circle. If we was close friends and you show me your character, you show me who you are, I'm going to forgive you.
Gotta be wise.
You know what I'm saying? I'm going to forgive you for whatever you may have said or done. But does that mean that now you come back into my five, my inner circle? No, that doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean I have to bring you back into my inner circle. If you show me who you are, you told me how you really felt about certain things within my
Right.
lifestyle or whatever the case may be, I don't have to bring you back in my inner circle. And that does not mean I'm holding a grudge.
No.
It means I
Don't be
realize that
wise.
me and you have to now set a boundary.
Right.
Because for whatever reason, whether that's setting a boundary because our lifestyles are different or whatever that may look like, it's okay for me to do that. And I feel like society and even the church, because we preach that particular scripture so much and beat it over people's head, it kind of forces us to feel like if we don't bring somebody back in, that we're not forgiving them.
Right.
And I want to say there is nothing wrong with setting boundaries. Boundaries are important. I look at it this way. When you are raising a child, you give that child boundaries, correct? Why? Because that child is underage, and part of
That's
you is
real
trying to
good.
protect them. A part of you is also making sure that they stay within the bounds of a child.
Mhm.
All these different things. So you set boundaries. But why is it that when we get older and we mature and we've gone through things with people, we try to hold on so tightly to every little thing that they do and them as a person that we no longer set boundaries? Whether that's in a relationship, as far as with a partner, or that's
Business
in a business relationship, or that's with a family member, or that's with
Right.
a friend. It's like, for whatever reason, we have such a hard time setting boundaries because we have this misconception that me setting boundaries is a bad thing. And I'm here to say, no, it's not.
It's not.
Setting boundaries is important. Setting boundaries is needed for you and for the other person. It is definitely okay to say no.
Yeah.
It's definitely okay to say, I have to set limits.
Correct.
There is nothing wrong with that. And that does not, if your heart is not doing it out of maliciousness, if your heart
No
is
resentment.
pure and you're not having any resentment or ill will, that is not a grudge.
Mm-mm.
That is you setting a boundary and saying, you spit on me once. I don't have to put myself back in the line of fire to get spit on again.
Right. You know, while you were talking, I thought of the scripture with Lot and Abram. When God told him, told Abram, you go that way and let Lot take his people that way. That was a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
He basically was saying, y'all not going to live on the same side of this line right here. You're going to go that way. You're going to go that way because there's too much going on between your men and his men. So therefore, in order to keep some of that away, I'm going to say you go over there and he take that corner over there. You see, that's a boundary, but we don't look at those parts. Sometimes we're naive. Mm-hmm. And we don't use wisdom. And then that's where the resentment comes in. That's where the anger comes in. That's where the bitterness comes in because you never set the boundary. If you would have set the boundary, some of those things could have been avoided. You know how to move. You know how to maneuver. I think there's something that you always say. When somebody show you how they are, you know how to move with them or something like that is what you say. And I learned the same to myself. You know what? That's not a bad thing. So if you show me your actions, I'm going to know how to move with you. And that prevents me from getting hurt, but it also prevents me from hurting you and putting myself in a negative space with God because I have to obediently love you as God told me. Then I have to love you in such a way that I don't slay you. And so even with me setting a boundary is my way of demonstrating love for you. Correct. And love for myself.
I was going to say, and most importantly, love for yourself.
Correct.
Because sometimes you'll sacrifice yourself because you're quote unquote forgiving and allowing somebody back in your circle. And so when I even made that comment of like, you show me who you are, I know how to move, it's because when I was younger, I did hold grudges. Yeah. I can honestly say, yeah,
I can say you did.
I held some grudges. You know what I'm saying? Oh, okay. I ain't talking to you no more. And the difference is I felt it.
Yeah.
You know, it was in
so
my heart.
Yes.
Because I would see that person immediately upset. I would look at certain people immediately upset. Yeah. My spirit would be completely negative when I was riding. And that alone was like, oh, Crystal, you holding on to some stuff. And now I'm carrying around this heaviness when you may not even be carrying around nothing, but I'm upset.
You don't even remember what you did.
You don't even know that you pissed me off because you over here trying to have a whole conversation with me. Ma'am, sir, we ain't friends.
Stop talking to me.
You know what I'm saying? And that alone is like, oh, you're holding on to a grudge. So I know when I was younger, I would hold on to grudges. And it took me saying, okay, I need to forgive and really learn how to let those things go. But me forgiving you now does not mean me and you are best friends. I remember having a situation with somebody and they did something. And with the comments that they made and how they moved, I was like, oh, you really don't like me as much as you try to act like you do like me.
Right.
And I realized for a while I was holding on to a grudge because the statement that they used and what they said, I was like, oh, that was an intentional way to try to get at me. You know what I'm saying? So I internalized that, and I would be very upset, and I held on to a grudge. And then I learned, okay, you know what? When I allow God to touch my heart, and I started working on myself, and even going through my career and everything like that, I really started to let a lot of things go because one, I was tired of being angry at folk, and two, I don't want to hold on to that stuff. I don't want to be walking around upset, girl. No, ma'am. No, no, sir. I want to be free. So, and when I let things go, I was able to talk to that person. Now, does that mean that I go back and be your best friend? And now you know the ins and outs of my life, where I'm talking to you about my husband, talking to you about my children, talking to you about my finances. No. Right. That's not me still holding a grudge. That's just wisdom. We can talk. Right. I can do pleasantries. I can say good morning. Right. I can even give you a hug. Right. We can even talk about, surface level stuff. Right. But me saying I'm not going to allow myself to go deep with you does not mean that I'm holding a grudge. Correct. It means I have now set a boundary. Right. Right. Because you've shown me things. There's wisdom. There's wisdom behind me not telling you my business. Because when things went bad, that was the first thing you threw in my face. Right. So I don't have to go deep. But that does not mean I'm holding a grudge because I'm still able to talk to you. I'm still able to kiki with you. And I'm still able to go about my business. Right. But I ain't stupid. Right. And I didn't forget. Right. And that means that now I'm going to use wisdom and I'm going to set boundaries and limitations on what I share. And that's because I need to do that. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It ain't for you. It's for me to now make sure that I'm protecting myself with what I do. And your family. You know what I'm saying? And so I feel like we have to, when we preach that particular scripture, it needs context. But that's the whole word. Add things behind it because I feel like, we preach that to people, but we don't teach people how to make sure that they're using it wisely at the same time. There's nothing wrong with forgiveness. We are supposed to forgive. So that scripture is true. You know what I'm saying? Right, forgive. Continue to forgive. Yet at the same time, just because you forgive does not mean you don't have to set boundaries or can't set boundaries with people. You're setting boundaries because I look at it this way. I've had certain clients that will come to me and let's say relationship wise, because that's what I get a lot with is women who have relationship difficulties and they continue whether the man cheated or was abusive in some way. In their mind, they apologize. I'm forgiving them. Right. And I'm forgiving them. So you keep taking them back because you're forgiving them, right? Your mind is 70 times 70. I'm following what Jesus told me. Right. I'm forgiving and forgiving. And then yet we wonder why it keeps happening. You're hurt. Or let's say you're bitter. Or, let's say it gets to the extreme for our domestic violence victims and people like them and they actually pass. Because they, in their mind, I was honoring and I was forgiving. And let's be very honest. In the church, a lot of churches preach, you take that man back and this, that, and the third. Let's just be very honest and transparent and call it what it is. Right. And because I've heard it. A lot of leaders I've heard it to where people have told them, you take them back, they're going to work on themselves and things like that. And then they do the same. Correct. And what I'm saying, yes, some people change, some people grow. So that's not the part of this message I want to go with that. But what I am going to say is in their mindset, I'm forgiving them. Right. Little do they know. Now their heart is angry. Like you said, they're bitter. So they forgave him, but this person, there really isn't no true forgiveness in there. Right. It's partial. They think they forgave him. Right. But there's so much that's been done that they should have set boundaries and forgiven. Yeah. But because they thought that they're supposed to forgive and let them back in, now that forgiveness isn't really what it could have been. Correct. And I feel like that's what a lot of people do. We forgive and forgive and forgive or think we're forgiving and we allow that person back in our circle so we really haven't forgiven them because what should have been done instead was setting a boundary so that way we can heal and truly forgive them. Correct. But if I keep allowing you back into my circle, you keep spitting on me and you keep hurting me, the forgiveness eventually, I don't want to say it's going to go away, but it is not going to be as effective because instead it should have also been boundaries set too. Yep. To know that person, you can forgive them and still let them go. Yep. Because you are also important. And I feel like sometimes we forgive and allow people to come back in our circle that we forget you are important. You're important. You're trying to save this person's feelings because I don't want them to. No, you're important. Are you not valuable? I'm valuable. Are you not worth it? Do you not matter?
Right.
I can matter and forgive you and know that, baby, you can't be back in my life. I deserve
Not
better.
in that way at all.
Not in that way. And maybe not at all. Some
Maybe
people just
some
can't
people
be in
can't
your
be in your
life.
life. That's true.
I can forgive you and love you from a distance because it can't be anything more.
Right.
You know, and I think we have to.
And that's
to
not
make sure
always on your part.
Correct.
That could be on your part because there are some changes you have to make as
Correct.
well. So
I feel like we have to do a better job of letting people know that that's okay.
yeah.
That you can forgive and that you can let people go. And you can set boundaries, and that does not mean you are holding a grudge.
Not at all.
And I think if we're going to people got to be very careful, one, what they say, because you will break somebody and allow them to bring back something that they don't need or shouldn't bring back.
Right.
Because you're telling them, oh, you're not being forgiving and you're holding on to grudges when that's not what it is.
Right.
And I think it's time for us to start understanding the difference, that if you don't have any ill will and if your heart is truly pure, it's okay for you to forgive that person and say, I'm not going to do the same things I did before with you.
Right.
Me and you ain't going to go shopping like we did. Me and you ain't going to spend all night talking on the phone.
Right.
Me and you ain't gonna go certain places. You ain't gonna come to my house. I may not want you at my birthday party. And guess what? That does not mean I'm holding a grudge. It means that maybe we are on two different paths of life and I can forgive you and realize that's just what it's supposed to be. And we don't have to keep encouraging people to forgive and bring people back in. I want that to be what's the difference. I can forgive you and not have to bring you back into my circle exactly the same way it was before. Because let's be very transparent. I'm gonna say it like this. It's not the same. It's not the same. Right. We try to say we can forgive and bring them back to where they were before. It's not the same.
Right.
Things have happened. I think when we forgive, we forget that stuff still happened.
Has there been a conversation about this thing?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We just go back to how we want to go back how things was before.
Like with
but
COVID.
That's not correct. That's not reality.
Like with COVID. Let's take off the mask. Just get people back to work. Let's just...
It's not reality. It's unrealistic. It's unrealistic. And so it's unrealistic for you to think that you can forgive somebody and bring them back into your inner circle and everything be okay. No, because if somebody did something to you, no matter how much you feel like you forgive them, if you bring them back in your inner circle, there's going to be some side eyes. There's going to be something because something happened. Right. So it's okay to be able to set limits instead and say, okay, you know what? Things have changed. Things have altered, and that's okay.
I think, like you said earlier, when you were talking about even the church and leaders in the church, I think that goes back to teachable moments. A lot of times, and one of the things I did learn coming up is that when you're reading the scriptures, you can't just read one scripture. You got to read the ones before it and the ones after it. Put it into perspective. You know, prophetically, a lot of times I'll read something, and as I read it, I could get a prophetic vision of what's going on or insert myself into the thought, right? But when you're teaching, you have to teach people how to implement that scripture. You don't just throw the scripture out there and be like, bye-bye. And a lot of times leaders don't teach because they've been taught to preach, which is two different things. Preaching a scripture and teaching a scripture is totally something different. When I'm giving it to you to implement, I'm going to teach you about that scripture and break it down as best I can to get you to understand how to implement it. You know, so that 70 times 70 really needs to be taught in a sensitive manner. Right? You know, and how you've done it with even with your definitions and helping people to understand. I think that is so good for those counseling moments. But I think that we now have to remember that people are in every facet of life are going through something where they need those teachable moments. And so understanding that just because I forgive you, I don't have to say, come on in.
Yeah, come
and
on,
then
best friends again.
Right. And then knowing and watching, and I'm still looking at you and your habits are still the same. So I'm looking to understand that you're about to do the same thing again. But we had the conversation the first time, second time, third time, fifth time, whatever it is, and it's still the same. Then I got to be cautious. I got to use wisdom. Because then if it happens again, I can't blame anyone but me. Yep. Because I allowed that to come back in. So that's very important to remember.
I fully agree. So I'm here to let people know that forgiveness is important.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is needed. And to recap, forgiveness is not for anybody else but yourself.
Yep.
You are choosing to forgive because you don't want to walk around with a heavy heart, with all these burdens, and because that's what you're supposed to do is be able to forgive. However, at the same time, letting go and setting boundaries is also okay. Yeah. You know, I talk to my clients a lot about dialectics, and dialectics are two things that are opposite that can both be true. It can be true that I've forgiven you. It can also be true that I want to set boundaries with you and not allow you back in my life.
Yep.
Opposites. It's for some people, right? But they are both true.
Yeah.
So I'm here to tell you it's okay to, forgive those people, and you want to forgive those people because you're walking around with baggage that you don't need to walk around with because of unforgiveness. So you should forgive. There's a lot of things that you may need to forgive and really work through so that way you are not holding on to grudges and unforgiveness. It is also okay to set boundaries with people and realize that things have changed. The relationship has altered because of whatever transpired. And so it's okay to set limits with that person, whether it's limits on how you interact with my child, whether it's limits on how you interact with me, whether it's limits on how much involvement I give you into my family, my business, or whatever else it looks like. It's okay for me to set boundaries just as much as it's okay and I should forgive you. And so I think we have to really understand forgiveness. So I would encourage people to really look into yourselves of what are you holding on to that you need to forgive, and then what do you also need to set boundaries with in your life, because we all have those things that we need to set boundaries with, or people we need to set boundaries with that we've allowed to keep spitting on us, stepping on us, coming into our inner circle that we know for a fact is no longer supposed to have that role. I love that part of a play because I love plays and I love Tyler Perry's plays. And I remember his one particular play where he talked about seasons of life, and he talked about people are for seasons, right? And I'm a paraphrase and say we try to hold on to people so tightly that are no longer supposed to be in our life.
Correct.
And oftentimes us holding on to people stops those people who are really supposed to be there in that place.
Yeah, and that too, yeah.
Right, because we're holding on so tightly to these three people that's from, our childhood, that done did everything in the book to us, that we should have been set boundaries with, but we want to hold on to them because we know them, that we stop ourselves from getting those people who we're supposed to have in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, because we holding on to you from when we was a teenager, and you no longer even want the place, but I want you to have it.
Right.
So sometimes you have to look at yourself and say, what am I holding on to that should have been for a season, that I'm taking with me into a season of life that I'm supposed to be going, and I can't grow because I don't have the right people. I have dead weight versus the people who's supposed to help me grow in this next season of life, because I refuse to set boundaries and limits of who I am allowing in my inner circle that no longer benefits my life. So I'm going to encourage you to really examine that and know that it's okay to set boundaries, and it's also okay to forgive at the same time.
Sneaker breach.
You know it, y'all. So we hope that you enjoyed this podcast, and we hope that you come back. We are going to be continuing to talk about various things. So this was just one. It was a spare of the moment type of topic, but I just felt like, hey, let's talk about this on the podcast versus being her continuing to talk about it. So I told her, let's stop, because I feel like the passion will be lost. Let's talk about it during the podcast. So we hope that you come back. We hope that you continue to vibe with us and listen to some of the other things that we got going on. But we encourage you to go back to our season 1 podcast and listen to some of those. But then also go watch some of our videos that we have been releasing as well. We're going to continue doing our podcast during this season, but also releasing videos just to kind of give you a more inner look into our life as well.
Yes.
So come back the next time, y'all.
Yep.
All right.
See ya.
So we want to thank you for listening in today, and want to encourage you to go and like our Facebook page and Instagram page, Sauce and Season, if you haven't already. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, comment, share, and turn on your notifications to know when we have released another video or have gone live. We hope that you were blessed in some way with today's podcast, and hope that you join us again for our next podcast. Thank you, and have a blessed day.